And we're back. Here we are continuing with the cardiovascular system. So here we are for Bio 130, Concepts of Anatomy and Physiology. This is Dr. Jenkins. Now, we've already covered the blood. That was our first portion of the cardiovascular system. And now we're going to continue. So now we're going to talk about the heart. So if the blood is the life fluid, the heart is what pumps that life fluid out to the body, and that life fluid is pumped out through a series of tubes or pipes called the blood vessels. This is a really fun unit, I think. To me, the heart, it's easier to visualize. It's not as microscopic. You can see the blood coming in. We can see how the muscles contract to pump it out. Goes through a series of tubes like plumbing. And it's really cool. So I'm excited. But then again, when am I not excited? So another way to think about this, in addition to a pump sending fluid out into pipes, is we can look at the blood vessels like roadways. Roadways that allow things to be transported. We have to send that blood throughout the body. And the blood vessels are the roadways in which we do that. And then the main central pump is the heart. Really, really cool. Now, we can't forget that all of our body systems work together. So, we tend to just kind of sit in our little silos. And well, right now we're talking about the cardiovascular system, heart and the blood vessels. Okay. Next time we're talking about the respiratory, lungs. Later we're talking about the kidneys. So even though each individual body system has its own major function, they work together. So I'm just reminding you that the cardiovascular system in particular is really working with pretty much every other body system. All right, so we're going to start with the blood vessels, and then we're going to end with a bigger portion, which goes over the heart. So here we go. A lot of this I think you already know, but let's just make sure. So we know that arteries are considered arteries because they pump blood away from the heart. Here it says out of the heart, carry blood out to the body. Maybe an easier way to think about this is arteries pump blood away from the heart. So arteries are responsible for carrying blood away from the heart, so that oxygen-rich blood. So the blood that's leaving the heart through arteries is oxygenated. It just came from the heart, which got the oxygen from the lungs. So arteries are red. They're shown as red. In fact, in real life, they look a little bit more red because they're carrying blood that is oxygenated, and it's carrying blood away from the heart. It could be away to the arms, it could be away from the heart down to the gut, and it could be away from the heart down to the legs, right? These are all arteries in that direction. Versus veins. Veins carry blood towards the heart, right? Veins carry, I'm sorry about that error message, we're just going to ignore it. Veins carry blood towards the heart. And this heart does not have oxygen, or this blood, excuse me, so it's considered to be deoxygenated. So this blood in veins is shown as blue because it does not have oxygen. It could be venous blood from the lower body. Could be venous blood from the gut or the chest. Could be venous blood from the head. So in essence, folks, these vessels are one-way streets. Each individual vessel can only carry something in one direction, one-way streets. No vessel, no single vessel has blood going both ways, just like a highway. Even though the arteries and veins are beside each other, just like a highway, one lane is beside the other. But each individual lane, each individual vessel is carrying blood only in one direction. Now, lying in between the arteries and veins are the capillaries, and this is where exchange of gases, nutrients, and waste takes place. So if we talk about it, we have the heart. The heart is going to pump out oxygenated blood through arteries. Then it's going to get to a capillary bed. And a capillary bed, it forms a bed or a network. So instead of just being a singular vessel or tube, it's a network of tubes, smaller tubes. So arteries lead into capillaries. At the capillaries, this is where the exchange is. Oxygen is delivered to the tissues. Waste products, such as carbon dioxide that were building up in the tissues, are picked back up for removal. Glucose is delivered. Amino acids are delivered. All that life blood, that life force, all the goodies that we need are delivered. Other waste products, such as hydrogen ions, any other waste product is picked up. And then it is veins that carry the blood back to the heart. This is our simple circulatory route. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, oxygenated, leads to a capillary bed for more surface area. This is where exchange takes place. Now we've delivered the oxygen. Therefore, the blood is now deoxygenated. And the vessels bringing that deoxygenated blood back to the heart are called veins. Pretty cool. Okay, I do want to talk about the blood vessel structure. And I'm gonna stand up here. You know when you sit so much, it kind of drives you crazy. So I'm gonna stand a little bit because I need to get some blood flowing through my legs. All right, so let's talk about the structure of these blood vessels. And I've pointed out the most important differences for you. Let me use green because I don't want you to think it's arteries or veins, particularly. So when we look at arteries, arteries have thicker walls, and those walls contain smooth muscle. So arteries have thick walls. In this picture over here, can't we see that arteries and veins, they exist side by side in the body. They run side by side. But they're separate vessels. The artery is the red one. It has a thicker wall made up of a bigger layer of smooth muscle. If you think about it, the arteries are coming right off the heart. So the heart pumps with a considerable amount of force. So therefore the arteries have to be able to withstand that force, thicker walls. And what about once we get down to the legs or the feet? Sure, it's easy to pump blood here, but as we get further away from the heart, just going to ignore that. As we get further away from the heart, we're going to rely on that smooth muscle to pump. Nowhere near as strong as the heart, but the smooth muscle is able to kind of contract a little bit to help pump that blood the rest of the way. On the other hand, veins have thinner walls. If you're interested though, veins tend to be larger in diameter, which is true, than arteries. But you need to know only what's in red. So veins have thinner walls, little smooth muscle, and something unique about veins is they contain valves. And those valves will prevent backflow. When it comes to veins, let me get blue to represent veins. When it comes to veins, we've got to pump the blood against gravity often, and we don't have the benefit of a heart at the one end of it. Arteries came right off the heart, so they benefited from the force and the pressure that the blood was being pumped out of the heart from. But veins don't have a pump, and they're often pumping, trying to deliver blood against gravity. So whatever progress we're able to make, maybe we can pump blood there. A minute later, we're pumping it there a little bit. We're able to get it there. Well, each time, we need to make sure that we close a valve so that whatever progress we've made, we close the valve so it prevents backflow. We're going to talk more about this later, but that's a structure that is unique to veins. We get a good picture here of the capillary bed that I was talking about. So remember, let me go in black here. The arteries lead into the capillary bed. This is where exchange takes place. Now the blood is deoxygenated, goes into the veins, back to the heart. Again, focus on what is in red. So the capillaries form a bed, more surface area for more exchange. This is where exchange takes place. The capillaries, therefore, have very thin walls. The idea here is that the walls have to be thin enough to allow us to exchange things through. All right, good stuff. So, how do we pump blood through these vessels? Well, we talked about arteries. Arteries, blood's going to move faster, and it's largely a result of the pumping effect from the heart. Just like a garden hose. The garden hose has the water coming right off the spigot. You turn the spigot on like the pump, water's going to rush out. That's just like an artery. As we said, veins have a harder job. Veins are often pumping blood against gravity, and they don't have the benefit of a pump at the other end. So blood's going to move more slowly, and the valves are there to prevent backflow. The biggest mechanism for how we push that venous blood back up, so we're talking about veins, is something called a skeletal muscle pump. So these veins sit between muscles, and that's what they're showing you in this picture. The vein is in the middle. Here's the vein trying to pump blood up. Here's the vein trying to pump blood up. On either side of the vein is a muscle. Skeletal muscle, skeletal muscle. So the skeletal muscle pump is how we rely on this. As a matter of fact, me just getting up while I'm doing this lecture is an example of the skeletal muscle pump. When you walk, even when you contract your legs when you're sitting to change position, by contracting the muscles around the veins, every time those muscles contract, so in this first picture, the muscles surrounding the vein are contracted, and it literally squeezes blood up. Sorry about that. It literally squeezes blood up. When the muscles relax, these valves close to prevent backflow. So some of that recently pushed up blood may start to drain back down, but by closing the valve, we prevent backflow. So it is cyclical. We're contracting these muscles and it squeezes the blood in the veins up. When we relax that muscle, the valves come down to prevent backflow. And then just a second later, We contract the muscles again to squeeze it up a little more. So we're squeeze, 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 a slow, steady squeeze. And every time there's a relaxation, the valves close to prevent backflow. I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so we've talked about the basic structure of arteries, veins, and capillaries. Well, let's talk about how the blood is distributed through these arteries, veins, and capillaries. Okay, so this is all some great introduction material, but let's just get right to it. And I think this is a really nice representation. The point that I want to get across is, and let's just write it down to make sure we're on the same page here. Blood is always being redistributed. Maybe a better way to say that is moved around. And I know that that's a little more general, but I like that better. Blood, folks, sometimes we deliver more blood here to this part of the body. Other times we deliver less blood over there to that part of the body. And that's by design. These series of pipes, these blood vessels, we always have some blood going everywhere. I mean, we have to have blood going everywhere for the tissues to stay living. So there's always some blood to your pinky toe. There's always some blood to your GI organs. There's always some blood to your quadricep muscles. There's always some blood going everywhere. But we have the ability to shift the blood around so we can change. Maybe more blood goes here and less blood goes there. We only have a certain volume of blood we can fill these pipes with. We talked about this in the blood chapter, right? Maybe 2 to 4 liters is the total quantity of blood someone may have. So we have that same 2 to 4 liters that we've got to supply everything with. And I love this example. You don't have to know the percentages, but I just like the idea. And you should know the idea. At rest, right? So on the left here, this is a pie chart showing you the blood distributed through our vessels, through our pipes, at rest. At rest, our blood is more evenly distributed. At rest, about 20% of our blood is in the blood vessels going to our skeletal muscles. A little bit more, look here. At rest, we can afford to put more of our blood flow in our gut. At rest, we can afford to put more blood flow to our kidneys. How does that change? When we exercise, we can shift. All of a sudden, we send much more blood to the vessels, to our muscles. Look at that difference. At rest, maybe only 20% of our blood was filling the pipes going to our muscles, 20%. At exercise, 70%, 71%. Well, the muscles are working during exercise. They need more blood. When we're exercising, we send much less to our digestive system and to our kidneys. Look at that. I'm just going to ignore that. Look, our digestive system at rest got 27% of our blood. During exercise, it gets 3%. So that's really important. We have the ability to shift around the blood to where it's most needed. There's always some blood going everywhere. But we can shift it around. So what are the takeaways? At rest, we have more blood going to GI tract, and kidneys. At rest. More blood going to the GI tract and the kidneys. On the other hand, at exercise, now we shift it. We have more blood going to the muscles and less blood going to the GI tract and kidneys. When you're exercising, you really don't care about digesting your breakfast. We still send some blood there to keep the tissue living. Okay, so those are the takeaways. Quite a difference, and this shows how well our body's able to redistribute this blood flow as needed. Okay, putting it all together, folks. I've already said this, let's say it again. The heart. The heart is going to pump out oxygenated blood through the arteries. That oxygenated blood eventually makes its way to the capillaries. In the capillaries, we deliver oxygen, water, glucose, and we pick up waste products, carbon dioxide. Whatever's leaving the capillary bed is now deoxygenated, so the blood looks more blue, and it's traveling through veins. So our deoxygenated blood returns to the heart through veins. All right. Oh, one of my favorite movies. Showing my age here. Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom. All right, let's talk about the heart. Oh, so good. Okay, so there it is. We know that, the basics of the heart, don't we? We know the heart. It's kind of heart-shaped, dare I say. It has 4 chambers, so we just simply divide it into 4. The upper chambers are the atria. Lower chambers are the ventricles. We have 2 sides. This would be the right side. This would be the left side. The sides are denoted by what it would be on that person. It does sit a little bit more to the left of the body. It's not quite in the center of the chest, a little bit more to the left. Okay, so make sure you know the things that are starred. Here we go. The myocardium. The myocardium is the muscle that makes up the heart. The heart, folks, is really hollow. So we have the heart. We got the 4 chambers. Well, the heart wall is made up of muscle. And it's a pretty thick muscle. It's pretty impressive. Because after all, this organ is a pump. Right? But the inside is hollow. Why does the inside have to be hollow? Because we have to have the ability for blood to pass through it. So it's basically hollow. And that's what this picture is showing you here of a real heart. There's dried blood on the inside, but it's hollow. And then the myocardium is the thick muscle that makes up its walls. The heart has a protective covering, a little sac called the pericardium. It's not shown in this picture, but if it was there, it would look like a little, kind of like a garbage bag consistency, thicker than that. I hate to say it's like a garbage bag, but... So that outer little sac is called the pericardium. And then you'll see some vessels on the outside of the heart, and those vessels are called the coronary arteries. These are the vessels that supply the myocardium. So here is a coronary artery. Here is a coronary artery. Travels down, then it goes down here. So these are our coronary arteries. Supply oxygenated blood to the myocardium so it can contract. And then we also have some coronary veins that bring back the deoxygenated blood. You don't need to know the specific names of the coronary vessels, just that they're the vessels on the outside of the heart that supply the myocardium. Now, I know these are getting busy, so whatever way is best for you to learn this, if you just want to look at a picture like this, this is going to show you the structures, pulmonary trunk, and so forth. But I've also labeled it my way with these big, obnoxious yellow things, right? Can't help myself. All right. So here's the basic anatomy of the vessels that surround the heart. I've put here either red or blue to determine whether it's an artery or a vein. Oh, this one should be blue. That's my fault. This one should be blue, folks. My bad. So these are blue, means they're veins. This is an artery. Okay. So the major artery that leaves the heart is called the aorta. There it is. Big fat artery that's going to pump blood out of the heart. Aorta. And there it is, right up front. The vena cava. We have the inferior vena cava, which brings deoxygenated blood back to the heart from the lower body. And we have the superior vena cava, which brings deoxygenated blood back to the heart from the upper body. Okay, this right here is called the pulmonary trunk. And the pulmonary trunk is going to split into a left and a right pulmonary artery, which we're going to talk about more. The pulmonary trunk, folks, it is an artery. It's the only artery in the body that is carrying deoxygenated blood. So this is not a typo. The one above is a typo because it should be blue for the vena cava. We're going to talk about why this is the case for the pulmonary trunk shortly, but let's just start with this. The pulmonary trunk is the only artery in the body that carries blood that is deoxygenated. The heart, it may be a little intimidating at first, but what I'm trying to do is present it to you in chunks, okay? So we began with some of the external anatomy. Then we began with some of the major surrounding vessels. So I encourage you to study this in chunks. To sit down and try and memorize all the anatomy at once is probably a little overwhelming. So learn it in chunks. Okay, the next chunk of information is the inside. The inside is hollow, and we've got these 4 chambers. The upper chambers are the atria, and the lower chambers are the ventricles. I would like you to know all 4 of these. So we have the right atrium. Remember, it's the right as it would be on that person. Right upper chamber, right atrium. Left atrium is right underneath this, still upper. And then we have our 2 lower chambers, the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Notice, what are some of the differences? The muscle surrounding the ventricles is much thicker. It has to be. What we're going to find out is, let's go with the black. The atria only have to pump blood that far. The right atrium only has to pump blood to the right ventricle. That's not very far. The left atrium only has to pump blood to the left ventricle. That's not very far. So it doesn't need that much muscle in the heart wall. But the ventricles, oh boy, the ventricles have to pump blood much, much farther. The right ventricle, sorry about that. The right ventricle has to pump blood all the way up here and out to the lungs. The left ventricle, folks, has to pump blood through the aorta out to the whole body. Woo! We're going to make sense of all these directions in a bit. For now, I'm just saying that the atria don't have to pump blood as far. They don't need as much muscle in their walls. But the ventricles, they've got to pump blood really far. So therefore, they have much thicker walls of myocardium. Okay, surrounding these chambers. So here is yet another chunk. Again, I encourage you to study them in chunks. Doing it all at once might be too much. So separating these chambers are valves. And we've got two sets of valves. The first set of valves are the atrioventricular valves. And they're located right where the name says they are, atrioventricular. The atrioventricular valves are right between the atria and the ventricles. On the right side, this is called the tricuspid valve because it has three cusps. 1, 2, 3. So the right valve that separates the right atrium from the right ventricle is the right atrioventricular valve, or tricuspid. On the left atrioventricular valve is called the bicuspid. It has 1, 2 cusps. So the bicuspid valve, sometimes called the mitral valve, you might hear this called mitral. That's pretty common, actually. The mitral valve, or the bicuspid valve, or the left atrioventricular valve, goes between the left atrium and the left ventricle. What do you notice about these atrioventricular valves? They are held in place by these cords of tendon called chordae tendineae. The atrioventricular valves are held in place by cords of tendon called chordae tendineae. You should know the valves and that they're held in place by chordae tendineae. Now, that's the first set of valves that go between the atria and the ventricles. We also have another set of valves called the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are between the ventricles and the surrounding blood vessels. The one that we can see on this picture is the pulmonary semilunar valve. These are called semilunar because their shape is like a crescent moon. Semilunar. The shape is like this. These valves are much thinner. These valves do not have chordae tendineae holding them in place. This one here that I just pointed to is called the pulmonary semilunar valve because it goes between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk. Underneath that would be the aortic semilunar valve. It would be right here. The aortic semilunar valve goes between the left ventricle and the aorta. Both of these have a similar structure. They do not have chordae tendineae to hold them in place. So two sets of valves, the atrioventriculars, tricuspid and bicuspid, and then the semilunar valves, which go between the ventricles and the blood vessels. here is a nice picture for you to study from, okay? So it doesn't have all my stupid, crazy marks on them, right? Again, it might be overwhelming, but the good thing about the heart anatomy is that it's very straightforward. It's not necessarily as microscopic, so you can see it. I'm trying to present it in chunks, so you can memorize it in chunks. Here's a real picture of what these valves look like. Pretty cool. All right. Okay, so now that we've gone through the basic anatomy, we've talked about the blood. In this chapter, we've talked about the anatomy of the arteries and veins and capillaries. And we've talked about the basic anatomy of the heart. We're going to begin to talk about how it all works together. Okay, just had to take a drink there. The heart functions as a double pump. So let's first talk about the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart, we're going to consider the pulmonary circuit. The word pulmonary tells us all we need to know because pulmonary means lungs. So indeed, let's lay out what's going to happen on the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart, which is in blue in this diagram, remember, right would be on this side. It's the person's right. Left is on this side. Imagine that we were just drawing a line. Okay. On the right side of the heart, what is happening? Blood is returning to the heart from the veins. So on the right side of the heart, it receives all the deoxygenated blood from the body. And then the right ventricle is going to pump that deoxygenated blood to the lungs. And of course, what's going to happen at the lungs? That blood picks up oxygen. What we've just laid out is the pulmonary circuit. The right side of the heart is the pulmonary circuit. It receives deoxygenated blood from the body, pumps it to the lungs to pick up oxygen. Now we continue with the left side of the heart. What's in red? So now that oxygenated blood from the lungs returns to the left side of the heart. And I'm doing this in order, folks. I mean, if we were going to assign chronological order, number one would be the blood return. Let's talk about the pulmonary circuit again. Number one would be that blood returns from the body to the heart. And then two, the heart pumps that blood out to the lungs to pick up oxygen. Now, three, that now oxygenated blood returns back to the heart, and then the heart is going to pump that oxygenated blood all the way out to the body. The left side of the heart, the part of the heart that steps 3 and 4, receives the oxygen-rich blood from the lungs and pumps it out to the body. This is called the systemic circuit because it's sending blood out to the body systems. I think that's a pretty good explanation, actually. Okay. Now, before we go any further, with the heart functions. We need to know blood flow through the heart. We basically just talked about it, but we didn't get that specific. I didn't say from which chamber through which valve to which chamber to which vessel. So if you get this idea from this slide, then you're ready to take it to the next step, to go step by step of the blood flow through the heart, including the chambers, the valves, and the vessels. Some people find this to be logical and they do pretty well with it. Other people, it tends to be a little bit more difficult. Wherever you are, make sure that you spend enough time with it so that you can get it. So I've listed it, and these numbers are missing, I'm sorry. I've listed it in words because some people like to see the words in chronological order. Blood flow goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And I've also put it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. So what I'm going to do is, because I use colors here, I use the green for the pulmonary circuit, and I use the yellow for the systemic circuit. I'm going to do the same thing. Green for the pulmonary circuit, and yellow for the systemic circuit. So it's kind of what we just talked about, but now I'm just adding all the anatomical structures. Here we go. Blood, number 1, blood is going to return to the heart from the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. And notice where it's returning to, the right atrium. So, what happens first in all this blood flow through the heart? Deoxygenated blood, these arrows are blue because the blood is deoxygenated. Deoxygenated blood returns from the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava to the right atrium. Step number 1. Step number 2, when the right atrial walls contract, it pumps blood through the open tricuspid valve into the left atrium. Step number 2, the right atrial walls will contract to push blood through the open tricuspid valve into the left atrium. What's going to happen next? Step number 3. The left atrial, I messed that up there. Left ventricle. Right ventricle. Ooh. Let's go back just to make sure I get it correct. I'm sorry about that. Step number 2 was the right atrial walls contract to push the blood through the open tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Now we're at step number 3. The right ventricular walls contract to push the blood through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, which then sends the blood out the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery to the lungs. This is why we now understand that the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary arteries are the only arteries that carry blood that is deoxygenated. The pulmonary artery, the pulmonary trunk, they're still arteries because they're carrying blood away from the heart. So it still satisfies the definition, carrying blood away from the heart. But it just so happens that this blood hasn't yet picked up oxygen. So it's still an artery because the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary arteries are carrying blood away from the heart. That's what makes it an artery. But this is the only case where that blood is deoxygenated. It hasn't yet gotten to the lungs. Everything in green that we just did is the pulmonary circuit, the action of the right side of the heart. Now we're going to switch to yellow. And this is going to represent the systemic circuit, or the left side of the heart. Step number 4. Now that oxygen-rich blood comes back from the lungs via the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Step number 4. The oxygen-rich blood travels through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. Again, these are the only veins that are carrying blood that is oxygenated. Why is it a vein? Because it's carrying blood towards the heart. It's still a vein because it's carrying blood towards the heart, but it just happens to be carrying blood towards the heart from the lungs. So only place in the body where a vein that is carrying blood towards the heart is carrying blood that is oxygenated. Okay, well, what's going to happen next? Similar to what happened on the right side, now we're just on the left side. The left atrial walls contract to push the blood through an open bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Step number 4. The left atrial walls contract to push the blood through an open bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Lastly, step number 6. The left ventricular walls contract to push that oxygen-rich blood through the aortic semilunar valve. It's going to go underneath the pulmonary trunk. That's why we can't see it. Into the aorta and out to the body. Step number 6. The left ventricular walls contract to push the blood through an open aortic semilunar valve into the aorta and out to the body. Pretty cool. If we were to really simplify it, I mean, you need to know more, but you need to know what we just talked about. But if we were to really simplify it, it would kind of look like this. Blood comes in, goes here, out to the lungs, and then it comes back from the lungs to this side, then it goes here, and then it goes out to the body. Woo! That's pretty confusing. Now, of course, these circuits, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit, are occurring at the same time. I broke it down just so you could basically follow like one blood cell going through all parts of the heart and lungs. But both sides are functioning at the same time. But I do believe it's a useful exercise to go through it as if you were just following one little blood cell on its journey. But they happen together. All right, so I'm going to take a little break here, and then we're going to come back and put it all together, like put it all really together, in what's known as the cardiac cycle. I'll see you then.